The wisest man who ever lived was, by his own account, the most exhausted. Not occasionally, not at the end of a long campaign or after some great loss, chronically, quietly, in ways that sleep did not fix and wealth could not solve. He wrote an entire book about it. We just never read it that way. Solomon had everything: 700 wives, 300 concubines, gold flowing in from every direction, a throne the ancient world agreed had no equal. He commanded winds, he directed spirits. He built a structure so precisely oriented to the cosmos that its dimensions became a reference point for sacred architecture across 3 religions. And he sat in the middle of all of it and wrote, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Not because he had failed, because he had succeeded at everything and was still depleted. That is the opening question. Not the philosophical one, the diagnostic one. What kind of tiredness does not respond to success? What is happening to a person when rest does not restore them, when sleep does not refresh them, when they wake and already feel they have been running, even though they have not moved? Solomon knew, and the answer he left behind is not what you would expect from a wisdom tradition. It is more specific, more technical, and more troubling. He did not call what he experienced ordinary fatigue. He used a specific word, a word that appears 22 times across his writings. The word is amal, spelled Aleph Mem Lamd. And if you look at what it actually means rather than how it is typically translated, you find something most readers walk straight past. Amal does not mean toil in the way we might say, "We have had a long week." The standard Hebrew lexicon, a Brown Driver Briggs, defines it as painfully wearisome, grinding, irksomely burdensome exertion, work that leaves marks on the inside, labor that does not stop when the task stops, sorrow that accumulates inside the body. Solomon uses this word to describe his experience of wisdom itself, of study, of achievement. Listen to Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 8. "All things are full of amal, man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing." He is not describing physical exhaustion. He is describing something that happens when the mind works without ceasing, when attention is always engaged, when there is no true stillness anywhere in the nervous system. And then, chapter 2, verses 22 and 23. "For what does man get from all his amal and from the striving of his heart, with which he has labored under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even in the night his heart does not rest." Even in the night his heart does not rest. He slept. He had no illness. He had every resource available. And in the night, his heart did not rest. He is describing a condition that millions of people would recognize this evening, lying in their beds, physically still, exhausted, unable to switch off. The wisest man in history did not consider this ordinary. He considered it a problem requiring a diagnosis. And then at the end of his life, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 12, "Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh." The man who had accumulated more wisdom than any person before or after him ends his wisdom tradition with an admission of cognitive fatigue. He is not being humble. He is not being poetic. He is being precise about something he had personally experienced. What most people miss is that Solomon is not complaining. He is giving you a taxonomy. He is saying, this is a category of experience. It has a name, it has a mechanism, and it has, somewhere in the tradition, a remedy. Now let me show you something from Proverbs that changed how I understand human energy. Chapter 17, verse 22. "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones." You may have seen this verse stitched on something somewhere. You may have thought of it as a sentiment about cheerfulness, but the Hebrew precision here is extraordinary, and it is almost never explained. The phrase translated as broken spirit is ruach neke'ah. Ruach is the animating breath, the life force God breathes into the nostrils of Adam in Genesis. Not quite the soul, it is the vital energy that makes a living creature animate, the force that drives intention. Neke'ah means crushed, stricken, struck down, a crushed, animating breath. Solomon is not saying that sad people get sick. He is saying something much more specific. When the ruach is crushed, it has a physical consequence located in the bones. In ancient Hebrew medicine, the bones were the seat of vitality. The marrow was the origin of strength. A crushed ruach, according to Solomon, dries up the very place in the body where vitality is generated. And here is where the ancient text and modern medicine arrive at the same point from opposite directions. We now know that chronic stress and depression suppress bone marrow function. The immune cells that fight infection are produced in bone marrow. When psychological states are dysregulated over long periods, that production falls. The bones, literally, become less generative. Solomon had no microscope. He had accumulated observation across decades, what lifted human beings, what depleted them. And his conclusion was anatomically correct, in ways that would not be confirmed for 3,000 years. The crushed animating force reaches the bones. A broken spirit does not stay in the mind. It settles. It dries things out. This is where I need to tell you about a document that most people in the world have never heard of. The Testament of Solomon. Composed somewhere between the 1st and 3rd century of the Common Era, written in Greek, attributed to Solomon himself. Not in the Hebrew Bible, not in the New Testament. Classified as a pseudepigraphon, a text written in the name of a great figure of antiquity. But not random fiction. It draws on traditions that predate its composition: Hellenistic Jewish demonology, Egyptian astrological medicine, early Near Eastern therapeutic practice. Chester Conybeare, whose translation remains a standard reference, treats it as a genuine window into ancient medical and spiritual thinking. And it opens not with war, not with a great victory. It opens with a sick child, a boy in Solomon's service, a child he is fond of. This boy grows thin every day. He is eating, he is sleeping, he has no visible illness, no fever, no wound, and yet, day by day, he wastes. Solomon investigates, he prays, and through prayer, he receives knowledge. A demon named Orneus comes to the boy every evening, men at sunset, and extracts his life force through his thumb. Not his blood, not his breath in any ordinary sense, his life force, the animating energy. And the first thing Solomon does with the divine ring given to him by the archangel Michael before building the temple, before commanding armies of spirits, is capture Orneus and stop the extraction. The very first act of Solomon's supernatural authority is a healing. A child was being drained, and he stopped it. What this story is doing, whatever you make of its supernatural elements, is categorizing something. It proposes that there is a mechanism of depletion that is not illness and not ordinary fatigue. The child is not sick. The child is being extracted from. That is the diagnostic category. Not disease, not overwork, extraction, something taking what belongs to the body, without the body consenting. The document goes further. In chapter 18 of the Testament, Solomon interrogates a series of 36 spirit beings, corresponding to the 36 deacons of the ancient Hellenistic Egyptian astrological system. They are classified according to the symptoms they produce in human bodies, alongside conditions we would recognize: epilepsy, heart disease, inflammation. The 14th deacon spirit is named Kumeatel, and Kumeatel's speciality is shivering fits and torpor. Torpor, not sleep, not sickness. A state in which the body is present but the energy is absent, a heaviness that cannot be explained by physical cause. In this classification system, torpor is placed in the same category as epilepsy and heart disease. Not a minor complaint, not laziness, a condition with a spiritual vector, a cause located somewhere other than the body itself. Torpor, named, classified, given a mechanism. And this is where it gets strange, because the same diagnostic category, with the same precision from within a completely different tradition, in a different language, on a different continent, appears in the morning prayers of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Sahih Bukhari, Hadith number 6367. Sahih Muslim, Hadith number 2706. Two of the most rigorously authenticated collections in Islamic scholarship. Both record the same morning supplication, a prayer the Prophet prayed every day. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal-kasal, wal-jubni wal-bukhl, wal-harami wa adhab al-qabr. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from inability and kasel, and from cowardice and miserliness, and from the burden of debt and the punishment of the grave. The word kasel. Classical Arabic lexicographers define kasel with a precision that is almost clinical. Kasel is not the absence of energy. It is not physical weakness. It is not illness. Kasel is the condition of having full capacity and feeling too heavy to use it. The limbs are capable, the mind is present. The will is intact in principle, but there is a weight, a pull toward inactivity that cannot be explained by what the body has or has not done. The Prophet distinguished kasel from ajz, genuine inability. They are listed together precisely because they feel similar from the inside, but have different origins. Ajz means you cannot. Kasel means you can, but something is making it feel like you cannot. Islamic scholars who commented on this prayer treat kasel as a spiritual condition, not physical, not psychiatric, a spiritual heaviness requiring spiritual protection. The Prophet prayed against it every morning, not occasionally, every morning, because he understood it as a daily threat requiring daily protection. I want to tell you something that happened to me in my second year of doctoral research at SOAS. I was in my mid-30s, working on my thesis on Merkaba mysticism and Second Temple angelology, reading in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, often simultaneously. It was approximately 2 in the morning. I had been in the library for perhaps 36 hours. I was not reading Ecclesiastes for research that night. I was reading it because I needed something. I am not sure I could have explained that need more precisely at the time. I found Solomon at chapter 2, verse 22. Even in the night his heart does not rest. I had to stop reading, because in that sentence, written by a man who had lived 3,000 years before me in a language I had spent 12 years learning, I recognized myself exactly, not metaphorically, precisely. My heart was not resting. I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hours I had been awake. I was carrying something that did not stop when I stopped, something that 36 hours of work had not created, and that sleep would not resolve. I sat with that for a long time, then I kept reading. Weeks later, and this is the part I am still not sure what to make of, I was working through the Testament of Solomon for the first time. I reached the opening passage, the boy who grew thin every day, Ornias at sunset, the thumb, the extraction. And I remembered something I had not thought about in perhaps 20 years. My mother, in Nansuka when we were children, used to rub palm oil onto our hands before bed. Every child, every night, the palms specifically. She would pray over us quietly in Igbo while she did it. I had dismissed it, as I grew older and more academic, as traditional Igbo custom. Ritual without explanation. Standing in the SOAS library reading about Ornias extracting life force through a child's thumb, I thought about my mother's hands covering my palms in the dark. She could not have read the Testament of Solomon. She would not have known the Greek word for the deacon spirit of torpor. She did not speak the language of Hellenistic Egyptian astrological medicine. But she knew something. In the language available to her, the language of Igbo protective tradition, of Catholic prayer, of maternal instinct refined across generations, she knew that the hands were a point of vulnerability, that the night required protection, that something needed to be placed between the sleeping body and whatever moved in the hours of darkness. I did not know that night whether she was right about the mechanism. I still do not know, but I knew she had been right about the category. The vulnerability is real. The need for protection is real. The question is only what language you use to describe it. Let me bring in 2 more traditions, because what they all agree on is more important than what separates them. In Yoruba thought, there is a concept called ori buruku. Ori is the personal head, the inner essence, the individual destiny, the animating intelligence that makes you you. Ori buruku means a misaligned head, an ori knocked off its proper axis. The symptoms, as described by Yoruba healers across centuries: inexplicable heaviness, inability to act on clear intentions, waking tired, declining motivation without external reason. A person who should be well, as who has everything they need, and is quietly wasting anyway. The treatment involves ritual baths using aluko, a plant with indigo properties used across West African healing traditions for spiritual realignment. The bath is not for the body, it is for the ori. The water carries intention to the level where the problem actually lives. In Igbo tradition, the related condition is articulated through the deity Agwu, the patron of divination, healing, and inspired knowledge. Before every healing session, the dibia must first appease Agwu, because Agwu is associated with giddiness and the inability to act on what one knows. If the relationship is not properly maintained, the dibia experiences scattered thinking and a heaviness that prevents him from doing what he is entirely capable of doing. What remains is a person who is intact, but running on diminished energy, capable but heavy. That is kasel, that is amal carried into the night. That is kume'ah, the decan spirit of torpor, classified alongside heart disease. That is buruku, treated not with rest but with realignment. Here is what I have found after working across these traditions for the better part of 2 decades. Every tradition, from Jerusalem to Lagos, from the Arabian Peninsula to Hellenistic Egypt, agrees on the same diagnosis. There is a form of tiredness that is not caused by physical exertion. There is a form of depletion that sleep does not fix. There is a heaviness that is not mood and not illness, and every tradition agrees it has a source outside the body, it requires specific intervention, and it is not permanent. Not one of these traditions blames the person experiencing it. Not one describes it as weakness of character or failure of will. They all describe it as a condition of relationship between the person and forces larger than the person, gone out of proper alignment. And every one of them provides a method, because the ancient world did not believe in helplessness before named conditions. If you could name what was happening, you could address it. Solomon's own decline, described in 1 Kings chapter 11, is presented in exactly these terms, not as sudden catastrophe, as a gradual drain. The text says his heart was not shalom with God as his father David's heart had been, shalom. You will recognize the root immediately. It is the same root as Solomon's name, as shalom, peace, as Jerusalem, the city of peace. Shalom means complete, whole. The way a vessel is integral when it holds without leaking. Solomon's heart lost shalom. Gradually, compound, over decades, 700 wives, the text tells us, 700 spiritual negotiations, 700 compromises of attention, 700 other altars built in proximity to the one altar that had originally held his center. The heart that divided its attention across 700 directions, over decades, lost the capacity to be fully present to any of them. He had not aged poorly. He had not suffered unusual loss. He had distributed himself too widely for too long, and there was nothing left in the center. Now let me give you something practical. 3 steps drawn from what these traditions collectively tell us. The first step: before sleep tonight, sit in stillness for 3 minutes. No screen, no music, just sit. And pay attention to what the stillness does. Here is the diagnostic principle. Physical fatigue is relieved by stillness. If you are tired in the ordinary way, stillness will immediately begin to feel like relief. The body will soften, the muscles will release, the mind will slow. But if what you are carrying is not physical, if it is the tiredness Solomon describes, the amal that continues into the night, then stillness will not feel like relief. It will feel like agitation. The tiredness may deepen. A restlessness may arise. That distinction is the diagnosis, not whether you are tired, whether stillness helps. If stillness helps, sleep. Your body is doing what bodies do. If stillness agitates, if 3 minutes of quiet makes you feel worse, that is information. That is the tradition telling you, this is not a physical problem. The second step: place both hands flat against your sternum, the center of the chest, flat palms one on the other, and breathe slowly 10 times. This is not a healing technique, it is an attention technique. The Testament of Solomon describes Solomon pressing his divine ring to his body when confronting spiritual interference, intentional, sacred attention placed at the body's center. Your hands are not Solomon's ring, but the gesture is the same. Deliberate presence directed inward. 10 breaths, hands flat, attention inward. You are not trying to produce a result. You are locating yourself. You are saying in the oldest language available to the body, I am here. What is inside is not unnoticed. The third step, speak aloud. Quietly is fine. In whatever language is most natural to you, begin with the words the Prophet prayed every morning. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ajzi wal kasal. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from inability and spiritual heaviness. Then add in your own words, Lord, let no spirit take from me tonight what you have given me. You do not need to be Muslim to speak a true prayer. You do not need to be any particular thing. Solomon's framework understood divine protection as available to anyone who called on the name with sincerity. His prayer for foreigners in 1 Kings chapter 8 makes this explicit. The prayer is not a formula. It is the act of a person saying, I'm aware of what is happening to me, I am naming it, and I am refusing to carry it alone tonight. That awareness, that naming, is itself part of the remedy every tradition prescribes. The ancient world was not unaware of ordinary tiredness. They worked harder physically than most of us ever will. They built pyramids without hydraulics. They moved the stones of Solomon's temple without machinery. They knew what it was to be tired. What they were careful to distinguish, and what I think we have almost entirely lost the vocabulary for, was a different category. Not tiredness from exertion, tiredness from depletion, the drying of the bones. The boy in the Testament of Solomon was not overworked. He was extracted from. Solomon, in his final years, was not ill. He was distributed beyond what could be held together. And the person you might be tonight, lying awake with a tiredness that sleep has not fixed for longer than you can remember, that person is not broken, not weak, not simply getting older. That person is carrying something that has a name, and things that have a name can be addressed. Solomon wrote the diagnosis, he left the framework, and then, in the last verse before his final instruction, he admitted that he had not fully solved it for himself. I find that honest, and I find it useful, because it means the condition is not shameful. The wisest man in history experienced it and wrote about it honestly. The naming of it, the willingness to say, something is taking from me, I want to understand what, is itself an ancient and respectable act. There is one question underneath everything we have looked at tonight, not whether you are tired, not what condition you carry. The question Solomon left us with, the question he could not ask himself early enough. What have you been giving pieces of yourself to, that you cannot ultimately keep? He asked it of himself at the end of his life, looking back across 700 compromises. You have the chance to ask it earlier.